So my first question for you about this report that you've come up with, and I've seen that I looked up your previous work also, and then you've been basically investigating the Khalistan movement for a very long time, and then you came out with this report. Can you tell us a little bit more about the motivation behind this report? What led you to sort of look into this, and what is the report about for our viewers?
Well, certainly I've had a kind of unhealthy fascination for this story ever since I was sent in 1985 to cover the explosion on board Air India Flight 182 in June of 1985 off the coast of Ireland. Well over 300 people were killed. It was at that time the deadliest terrorist attack ever anywhere. It was intended, in fact, to be two planes on opposite sides of the world. One bomb went off early at the airport in Japan and killed a couple of baggage handlers. But ever since then, I've been interested in, well, who would do this? And over the years, covering the twists and turns of the case, the rather bumbling Canadian efforts to get to the bottom of it, which they never really did. The trial failed, the bombing succeeded. And even though they had the bombers under surveillance before the bombing and knew immediately who did it, they never seemed to be able to nail it down. And for the most part, with the exception of the bomb maker, they got away with it. Anyway, to move forward to the present, I had noticed over the years a sort of common theme that many of the people involved in this attack and many others seem to have spent time in Pakistan. And Pakistan seemed to assume a very important role as a safe haven, staging post, training camp for Khalistani militants seeking to cross the border, make trouble in India. And of course, this all made perfect sense in a geopolitical sense, if you will, for Pakistan to get revenge, I suppose, for the 1971 war, in which Bangladesh was split off and was no longer East Pakistan, became independent. To create a buffer state as well between Pakistan and its enemy in India, and also to cut off, importantly, India's land access to Kashmir, which is also important for Pakistan. All of that made sense. But then looking at it, there are a lot of elements that didn't make sense. I'll just mention two. The first is that in the modern day, although Pakistan seems to have this role as the safe haven and protector of the Sikh independence movement, nevertheless, Sikhs are still being driven out of Pakistan by a variety of abuses leveled against all kinds of religious minorities in Pakistan. In the past year, there have been, 50 or 55 cases of forced conversions, kidnappings, and abductions of Sikh girls. Nothing you can do about it. The government just lets it happen. So it's very odd that in this environment where the numbers of Sikhs in Pakistan are diminishing rapidly, it's almost like partition is still not over for Sikhs in Pakistan. Pretty soon there'll be none left, where there were 2 million when this whole story began at the time of partition. That's one thing that seemed pretty odd, that there would be this alliance with this atmosphere of discrimination and even persecution against Sikhs in Pakistan. And the second thing which struck me was, what is Khalistan, the supposed independent state of the Sikhs that is proposed by its adherents? Where is it? What's the map? And you look at the maps that they propose, and it's a very ambitious agenda. It includes all kinds of Indian states, not just Punjab, the homeland of the Sikhs, but also Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, all the way to Delhi. And yet, if you look on the western side of the border of the new Khalistan, not 1 inch of Pakistani territory is claimed on these maps for the new Khalistan. The reason that's extremely odd, of course, is because there are extremely important sites, Sikh traditional sites inside what is now Pakistan, which are not included in these maps. I mean, what about Lahore, where Maharaja Ranjit Singh had a Sikh empire, did he not, a couple of hundred years ago, based in the capital of Lahore, now in Pakistan. What about Nankana Sahib, which is only the birthplace of the first Sikh guru, Guru Nanak? So that seemed very odd that the Sikh independentists or sovereignists, the Khalistanis, if you will, were so seemingly dependent on Pakistani support that they didn't dare to trespass on 1 inch of Pakistani territory, no matter that that territory is absolutely central to Sikh history and culture. And so that's part of the background to my writing this article.
Right. I mean, from what you say and from what we've read and what you've seen before, it appears that, there are sentiments within the Khalistani sort of these militants or the Sikhs living abroad of sort of having these aspirations. But at the same time, they seem to have, as you mentioned, perhaps there is a very strong Pakistan connection. Do you think that this movement for Khalistan is at all organic, or most of it is engineered in your sort of analysis?
I think both things can be true. Two things can be true at the same time. It can be both an indigenous, genuine, organic movement propelled by the aspirations of Sikhs around the world. And it can also be dependent on a crucial role in supporting that movement for Pakistan. Both those things, I think, can be true and are true. The problem at the moment, though, is that there's one more great oddity, which is intriguing, and that is that it sure doesn't seem to interest Sikhs in Punjab. The independent state of Khalistan is so unattractive, apparently, to the vast majority of the world's Sikhs who still live in Punjab, 90% of them or more, that at the last elections in Punjab, not only did Punjabis vote overwhelmingly for a fiercely anti-separatist Sikh chief minister, but the only party to offer a separatist platform in that election, as in 2017, received, I think, 0.32% of the vote. So a fraction of 1%, a microscopic harvest of votes for the only sovereignist party running in that election. But this isn't true in the diaspora. Sikhs are spread out all over the world. They're extremely enterprising people. They've made a real mark for themselves, not just in India, in the professions, in the army, in the bureaucracy, but all over the world as businessmen, doctors, you name it. And in the diaspora, there is still a significant independence movement. It just isn't shared by most Sikhs who live in Punjab.
Right. Coming to the aspect of the Canadian sort of residents of many of these people with Khalistan sentiments for the Khalistan sort of independence. With your report coming out and this being sort of the as it's called, the report it's a project of Pakistan, as the title suggests. In Canada, you've also mentioned some of these Sikhs who have been living there, and then of course the bombing that happened in 1985, and so all of this. I mean, how does Canada respond to all of this? Is Canada or the Canadian government or the authorities there worried about this connection? Are they looking into it? Has there been any reaction post your report or in the past?
Well, I'd say that the government is intermittently sometimes worried when it blows up in their faces that they have been pandering to the votes, to get the votes of organized Khalistanis in Canada. That is to say that, not to be too polite about it, that politicians in Canada have recognized for many years that the Khalistanis are extremely well organized. They can indeed deliver blocks of votes in political districts which can turn an election, a national election, some districts in Ontario and in British Columbia on the west coast of Canada. And they've noticed that it pays them well not to antagonize the Khalistanis, shall we say. But then it tends to blow up in their faces. For example, in 2018, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau paid a visit to India, which embarrassingly turned it into something of a fiasco, because it turned out that a convicted Khalistani terrorist who'd attempted to murder a Punjabi cabinet minister on Vancouver Island years ago, and had been involved in other activities as well, a member of the International Sikh Youth Federation, which is a banned illegal terrorist organization, officially so designated in Canada and many other countries around the world, including the US and India, of course, and the UK. This person had somehow got an invitation to a couple of glittering receptions for the visiting Prime Minister Trudeau in India, in Mumbai and in New Delhi. How did he get on the guest list? That was embarrassing, to say the least, at a time when the, as I say, fiercely anti-separatist, anti-Khalistani Sikh First Minister of Punjab, he had at one point refused to meet with one of Trudeau's cabinet ministers on the grounds that he thought he was a Khalistani sympathizer. They got over it, they papered that over, but relations pretty frosty as a result of that, and it's still an obstacle in relations between two democracies who ought to be the best of friends, but it's not working out because of this political pandering by the Canadian political class. The other problem in Canada, of course, is that Canada was the host and the country of citizenship of the people who carried out the Air India bombing in 1985. And the crime was never properly solved. The bomb maker went to prison, but the mastermind of the case, Talwinder Parmar, famous terrorist, internationally known terrorist, who died in India when the police caught him in 1992, he is still lionized, revered, glorified even, as a saintly martyr of the Sikh nation, with giant martyr posters as a shaheed and a holy man are pasted on the outside of a very important Gurdwara, a Sikh temple, in British Columbia. Now that too is embarrassing. This is a mass murderer, Canada's worst mass murderer by far, who is being revered by a significant section. It's one Gurdwara. There's another in Ontario which has similar sympathies. And that, if you're an Indian diplomat and you're invited for the Vaisakhi Day parade at that Gurdwara, you're not going to go, and you're going to object, and you're going to say, this is crazy. You are glorifying a mass murderer. What is going on in Canada? And it's a hard question to answer.
Right. Just moving to the end of this interview, I would just like to ask, if you look at this situation, I mean, the 1985 bombing of the Air India bombing, I mean, it was basically a prelude to sort of what we saw later on, much, sort of the 9/11 attacks. It was, and we saw that happening way before the 9/11 attacks. And in that sense, I mean, we always talk about this in Pakistan, for example, when I've been reporting on militancy, we've seen that, they usually create this distinction that these are pro-Pakistani militants or these are anti-Pakistani militants, and they'll go after the anti-Pakistani militants. In the same way, do you think that, if there are these Sikh militants and these Sikh terrorists and they have connections to Pakistan, what is the danger of them joining hands with Islamist terrorists tomorrow to sort of, further their own agendas, and because they have the same kind of handlers at the back end at the end of the day? Is this worrisome in Canada?
This has already happened. It's not so much, I wouldn't say that it's a danger that it might happen, because it's already happened and has been happening for years. For example, the most obvious example, we mentioned Parmar, the mastermind of the Air India bombing. When he fled Canada after the bombing, he went to Pakistan and linked up, yes, with the ISI in Pakistan, the Pakistani intelligence agencies, and also with the Kashmiri militants that were also being supported by the same ISI agents and for the same reason, to bleed India, to make trouble for India. And so that alliance began years ago, continues to this day. And in fact, I mentioned that Parmar was eventually killed in '92 by the Indian police in Punjab, Sikh police, by the way, and that he was in the company of 4 other men, 2 of whom were carrying Pakistani ID and were in fact Pakistani ISI agents, including one who had been working for years with Sikh militants and Kashmiri militants. As it were, they were stablemates under Pakistan's wing. So not only in that case did we see that Pakistan was providing a safe haven for Sikh militants operating in India, just as they also provided a safe haven for Kashmiri militants. But also, in this case, 2 Pakistani agents actually crossed the border and were brothers in arms with a leading and very important Sikh terrorist, to the point they were carrying with them, when they were caught by the police, a rocket launcher, a bunch of AK-47s, lots of ammunition, and so on. They were heavily armed. This was a serious gang of terrorists, and the alliance between Sikh sovereignists and Kashmiri militants had been cemented years before and continues to this day, I believe.
And just to add to it, I mean, this is basically on the Pakistani soil in South Asia, but in West, is there a fear of this sort of alliance? Because the West has been seeing, I mean, in the last few years, or since 9/11 for that matter, there's been an increase of Islamist attacks. You know, do you see any that kind of potential that, you know, Sikhs and Muslim Islamist terrorists could partner up in the West?
It's not out of the question. I mean, I'll use an example. Again, the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai, launched by Hafiz Saeed in Pakistan, so an Islamist attack on India, happened then. And that terrorist, Hafiz Saeed, is a friend, a proud friend, of a gentleman named Chawla, who is the leading Khalistani separatist inside Pakistan. So in Pakistan, they're not afraid to even, you know, appear together for pictures. So the alliance is real to this day, as I said a moment ago. Where it goes next is anyone's guess. All I know is that Pakistan is gradually becoming a wholly owned subsidiary of China, that the geopolitical implications of that are ominous for Western countries like Canada, who are in the throes of a confrontation with China. As you may know, there are a couple of Canadian citizens kind of being held hostage in a case with China, who are still in prison, and that we want to get them out. In fact, the whole of the West is really in a confrontation with China, and China is gradually buying up Pakistan. So look out is all I can say.
Right. Thank you for that interview and joining us today on South Asia Press. This was Terry Milewski, who is the author of a paper that has just been released recently called Khalistan, a project of Pakistan, and it's available on their website, on the MLI website, which is the think tank based out of Canada. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.